Welcome to the Mount Vernon vlog. My name is Ethan and I am the digital storyteller here. Today we have a really special episode. It's actually part one of a three-part series. I was given the opportunity to go to the Fairfax County Courthouse and was allowed to look at George and Martha Washington's wills in person. It was awesome. You might ask, well, why would I want to learn more about George Washington's will? Well, surprisingly, Washington's will revealed a lot about who he was. It's a very personal and definitely paints a more human portrait of him from the historical giant that we know him as. So when I went there, I met with the manager of Fairfax County Courthouse of the historical documents. We met with the head of the George Washington Papers Project, and I also spoke with one of our curators here at Mount Vernon, where we talked about the Emancipation Clause in Washington's will, which was about the freeing of his slaves. For part one, we dive into the content of Washington's will. If this is your first time to our channel, welcome. We have tons of content for you to explore. If you haven't subscribed, the subscribe button is on the lower right-hand corner. I'm really excited to explore this more personal side of Washington with you guys, and I hope you enjoyed the video.
For the documents for the Historic Record Center for Fairfax Circuit Court, and I'm going to go ahead and open it up and pull the wills out for you.
Awesome.
It is 29 pages front and back of his last will and testament, and then an additional 15 pages that details all the property that he owned in Virginia and around the rest of the United States.
A very interesting section of the will is the property schedule that George Washington himself wrote. Basically, it details all of the land that Washington owned, everything from the size to the price to the location of the land. So, why is this an important aspect of the will? Well, it shows just how much Washington cared about his land. He was very detailed and extremely organized. Also shows that he did it himself. He could have easily had a lawyer do this, but Washington knew everything about his land and wanted to make sure everything was handled the way he wanted it to be.
So the property schedule is unique. We have other early luminaries of Fairfax County, their documentation in our records. Nobody has a document like this that has such detailed descriptions of the property they own, especially property outside of Fairfax County. And the fact that there's values attached to it that were done by Washington as opposed to by one of his executors is also very unusual.
We are fortunate enough to be joined by Bill Ferraro, who heads the Washington Papers Project at University of Virginia. He's also an official expert on the will, and was able to provide some more insight to what topics were important to George Washington as they were represented in the will.
So the will casts perspective and light on all aspects of Washington, and it really shows that he has a dynamic mind. That's the other thing that's so important about this will. He wrote it himself, as he says. He did not have legal counsel. He wrote it entirely out of his own experience as an administrator, as a general, as a person who had incredible capacity for organizing activities. Back to the legacies, and this is another thing that you think about wills as they're very kind of cold, final, legalistic, and we also think about Washington. We think of the statues, we look at the dollar bill, and we think about a man who was removed, who was cold, who was distant. This will shows instead a man who had a very rich emotional life, who had affectionate relationships with many people. And he makes the legacies, and the legacies form the greatest bulk of this will. The whole will is 29 pages, from pages 10 to 26. It's just an array of legacy to all sorts of people. Primarily, it's relative. Friends are acknowledged here, notably James Craik, his longtime companion at arms, who was a surgeon during his military adventures, beginning of the French and Indian War, and then he was one of the attending surgeons at his deathbed. And then we move even to servants and some slaves, notably Billy Lee. So he has connections and ties to an incredible array of people.
In addition to wanting to establish an American culture through the creation of a national university, Washington also wanted it to help unify the states. He foresaw how political division could start a civil war, and he wanted to try and prevent one with such an institution.
The other really important aspiration for Washington that can be seen in his will is what can he do to further the national experiment to make the United States a successful country. And the principal idea Washington has is to promote the establishment of a national university. And he spends 5 pages, running pages 6 to 10, outlining and talking about his ideas, his vision for this national university. Very interestingly, he says to his great chagrin, he's noticed that many promising young men in the United States get educated overseas, and he sees that as a very detrimental practice because overseas they develop habits of dissipation and extravagance.
And those are Washington's words.
Washington's words, straight out of the will. And on the page I'm looking at here in the will, he says, the National University will help do away local attachments and state prejudices. So he sees these state prejudices as being hazardous to trying to build a coherent, strong union. So while he's not prescient on technological and transportation developments, he does have a premonition that there might be a division within the country and result in a civil war. And he's wanting to do whatever he can to make this not happen. So he leaves chunks of his stock and potential money, and he instructs his executors to work with other agencies, including Congress, to create a national university. And looking at this page, it's fascinating to see he emphasizes the word university by writing it extra large.
And what was the result of his request?
There was debate. There were some proposals, went on for several presidential administrations, and then the National University just fizzled.
Roughly 500 words of Washington's will are related to those who were enslaved on his plantation. Washington states in his will that it was his desire to free them earlier, except that many of those slaves that he owned were married to those owned by the Custis estate. So Washington knew that by freeing his own slaves, it would lead to the separation of many families, and he stated that he wanted to avoid the painful sensations that would entail. So in the last 2 decades of his life, he starts to have a lot of inner conflict about being a slave owner, and in private he says to family and friends that he would support gradual legislative abolition in the United States, and he looks into various schemes that might allow him to free his slaves before his death or reduce the number of enslaved people on his plantation, because at that point he was also opposed for moral reasons to selling enslaved people. So he really feels like he's in a bind in the last 2 decades of his life, and his will is kind of the solution that he comes to. That's the way that he's going to solve his problem.
Thank you so much for joining us for this very special edition of the Mount Vernon vlog. I hope you learned a few new things about George Washington that kind of humanized him a little bit more for you, and also that you can actually learn a surprising amount about a person through their will. In part 2, we'll take a look at how his will was preserved over the years, and there's a pretty cool story in there too that I'm really looking forward to sharing with you. Again guys, if you haven't subscribed already to our channel, please click the subscribe button on the bottom right hand corner underneath this video and click the notifications button so you can get a notification for every time we upload a new video. Thanks again, and I hope to see you soon.